word in Hebrew means to hate somebody like an enemy. I don't know if you have an enemy, but I know this. Your brothers aren't supposed to look at you like an enemy. An enemy is somebody who could die or get hit by a bus and you wouldn't mind. That's an enemy, right? An enemy is somebody usually that without having time to think about it, you really would want revenge against your enemy because you hate your enemy. The word in Hebrew is the word they use in this passage for how his brothers hated him. They hated him. And if you know the story, you know that they think about actually killing him. That's how much they hated him. And if it wasn't for the persuasion of one of the other brothers, or two of the other brothers, they would have done it. But instead, what they do is they downgrade the murder plot, and they end up just selling them into slavery. A little bit better, right? How many raise your hand if you want to be a slave? Love that question. Never seen anybody raise their hand. Well, until today. Awesome. Candidate for slavery. I'll tell you what, you can be a slave to Christ and no one else. All right? But, so that's significant for me when I did the word study because I wanted to know just how much they hated him. I mean, they hated him the way Voldemort hates Harry. Seriously. Right? And so I guess you could say that on the other side of it, Joseph gave them a good reason. It's a good reason, and this is an interesting part where I'll pause and talk about kind of the first truth. When you talk about resetting your humility, this idea of I'm not really a meek person, I don't want to be meek, I want to be famous, or I want to be significant. Most of us, that's why we're mad every day we wake up, by the way. We don't feel important. Most of us rehearse all of the negative stuff we've ever heard. 10 people can tell you something good, but one person tells you something negative, that's what you believe. And not to mention the fact that we totally discount when like our parents tell us something good. Your parents can say, oh, you're so beautiful, you're so strong, I just love you, you could probably jump over a 50-foot building. All right, your parents could tell you any number of positive things. How many of you have trouble really taking that and thinking it's genuine? Because you're kind of like, you're supposed to say that. How many of you think that when your parents say good things to you? Look around you, look at the hands. My hand's up, look around you, all right? So we all feel that, right? You have to say that, you gave birth to me, right? Now, there's some truth in that. But Joseph has a big mouth. And sometimes we have a big mouth. We have a big mouth via Twitter, via Facebook. I have kids, not kids, but students that used to play basketball for me. Some of them graduated, some of them are no longer at the school where I used to work. And they're on Twitter, and they're supposed to be followers of Christ. And nobody's perfect, right? But they're on Twitter cursing, tweeting obscenities. They're on Facebook bullying. You know, which if that's who you are, okay, wear the label, but you can't be both, right? So I always, sometimes I jam them up. I'll just make a comment on the wall, be like, dude, remember you're friends with me on Facebook, bro. I'm checking all this out. Is that who you are? Is that who you are? Because you can't rock the mic like that. You know, because people know you in one identity, and then you're showing them something else. But here's my point. Here's what Joseph didn't know. Everybody doesn't think you're awesome. Joseph thought, he knew he was his dad's favorite. His brothers knew it and they hated him. Remember, they hated him like an enemy, and he didn't know it. So not only did he have this code, he had this attitude, and it was problematic. And that's what I would ask you, if we could kind of fast forward. I'm quickly trying to make some applications based directly on this story, and I have a lot more detail I could go into. But how many of you at the start of school, this is rhetorical, don't raise your hand, are not excited because, quite frankly, like we said earlier, you're kind of over it. But maybe there's a part of you that's kind of like, I'm better than this place. I don't want to impact the spirit Christian because I'm better. This idea of walking my talk. Who cares? I've seen all these people who don't walk their talk. Some of you might be saying my stepmother or my stepfather or my mom or dad or my brother or whoever your role model is that you looked up to when you were younger, because everybody did. A lot of people try to say they don't have role models. We all do. Because when you're a kid, that's how you learn. You learn how to walk, you learn how to talk. How many of you know somebody that they sound just like their dad or their mom, their voice? I sound kind of like my dad, and I wasn't really raised by him. So we bear those markings. You look at your authority figures and your mentors and all that stuff when you're little, and you kind of want to be just like them when they let you down and kind of give up on it. And so maybe that's where you are at the start of the school year, and that's why you need to reset. Because like Joseph, maybe you think you're more awesome than you are. And that's, there's nothing wrong with thinking you're, like he essentially, in those dreams came from God. And in fact, in the Bible, a lot of dreams come from God. God used to use that as a mechanism for speaking to his people. In fact, that's the reason Jesus was able to actually leave childhood safely and go through his life until he was eventually, at the end of his ministry, crucified, that we might be saved. There was another Joseph in the New Testament, if you may remember, in Matthew chapter 1, and I think around verses 20 and 21. He has a dream. You remember? Raise your hand if you remember what I'm talking about. The Joseph in the New Testament, getting ready to marry Mary. Anybody remember that? All right? Quick pause. You know what I like about when you're talking to an audience? They take on kind of this like group mentality. So nobody out there really thinks you're talking directly to them. One day you're going to speak, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's an interesting dynamic. But I'm talking to all of y'all, just to remind you. So this Joseph in the New Testament, in Matthew 1, has a dream. And the difference between the New Testament Joseph and Joseph, the son of Jacob, is this. Joseph, let's see if I can find it. In my notes here, I'm getting off track. I can sum it up without turning there. Joseph this angel comes to him and basically says, that you don't put her away. Like he had a right. Joseph had a right because his wife to be was pregnant, found to be with child. Basically, the angel came to him and told him that the baby is from God, and the baby is going to save people from their sins. And it changed him. And part of that, though, he told Mary, but he didn't blurt it out to the world. And sometimes I wonder, in the life of a young person like you guys, here today, staying up late all night maybe. Maybe you were doing social media. Maybe something's wrong with your house and you didn't get rest. Maybe somebody in here, your family's going through some financial struggles, so every day is a tough day and you don't want to be here. But maybe God is still speaking to you in the struggle. And part of walking your talk and part of being humble is listening to God and actually just keep holding that stuff in your heart the way the New Testament Joseph did. You could argue that the mistake that the Joseph of the Old Testament made, the Joseph in Genesis 37, was that he told publicly something that was meant for him. It was a private revelation. But here's how the story unfolds. The story unfolds to the degree that he tells his brothers this, and then his dad sends him out to go find his brothers because they were grazing the cattle. Why he wasn't working, I don't know. But he sent him, and so Joseph goes and finds his brothers. And when he goes to find his brothers, on his way over to him, he's walking in it says afar off, they can see him. Here he comes. And they literally in the text, it says, here comes the dreamer. Get a load of this dude. The dreamer. Remember the story he told us, fellas? The brothers are talking. Brothers. I don't know if they were brothers or just brothers. But. So they see him afar off, and he's coming, and they say, here comes that dreamer. And they start to plot immediately. He has no idea. So by the time he gets to him, they strip him of his coat, they take off that fancy coat his dad gave him, and you know the story, right? What do they do to him? Where do they put him? In a hole, in a cistern, in a pit. And they kind of let him kind of stew there. They weren't going to kill him, but Reuben talks him out of it. And his plan is maybe, later on I'll bring him back to father. Reuben's the oldest, by the way. So Reuben is nervous because that's going to come back on him. The youngest gets killed, or not at the time, he wouldn't have been the youngest. But he would have been the second youngest. And if something happens to Joseph, especially the fact that Joseph is the apple of his dad's eye, that's going to be hot. He's going to be upset. Just like if something happened to you today. I mean, in our world, right, we could say, well, shoot, if we only lost one kid today, like one of you just disappeared, hey, at least we only lost one. We could think like that, but your parents wouldn't. The parent of that child is thinking, man, I'm shutting this place down, right? So we have a responsibility to you. That's how Reuben felt. So Reuben saves Joseph's life. Story goes on. Some Ishmaelites who were some traveling kind of, they're merchants and they were traveling by, they're approaching and they're like, don't kill him, he's our brother, right? Let's just sell him. So they sell it for about the equivalent of $5, like 20 shekels or something like that. So they sell him into slavery. And back then, slavery, contrary to what a lot of people say, well, history wasn't saying that then, it wasn't so bad. Again, I guarantee you, voluntarily, if you knock on doors in the ancient world and you say, excuse me, I'm just doing a survey, I want to know if you'd like to be a slave. It's not so bad. In fact, slavery gets really bad in about 3,000 years. This is really a cool form of slavery. In fact, who wants to sign up? No one would. Because when you were a slave, you lost your identity. You lost your name, you lost your heritage, you didn't get to ever go back home, and you got displaced from your native land. Some of you are like, I could use a trip, I wouldn't mind going somewhere else. Fine. but you don't want to be forced to go. So Joseph was forced to go, and then after that, he was sold again. And this was the blessing part. Even though this is a guy who thought he was awesome and suddenly is faced with the reality of realizing he's not, he still has a great plan. Because actually, he's awesome as long as he understands that his awesomeness comes from God. What's the great plan? I'll get to it in a second as we wrap it up. But he's sold twice. He sold to those Ishmaelites, and then the Ishmaelites sell him to an Egyptian official who's like one of Pharaoh's highest ranking officials. And that ends up being a good thing for Joseph because he's able to learn, he's able to serve, and he's put in a position eventually where he ends up getting met with another trial later where that guy's wife accuses him of trying to rape her. It's pretty bad. He sits in prison for a while, but through a series of events, because Joseph can interpret dreams, Pharaoh starts having these dreams, and then through a series of events, Joseph ends up before the king of Egypt. And the king of Egypt sees that Joseph is able to help him out with clarity. And so suddenly what starts to become real to Joseph is that, man, I'm just assuming through the process of his life, his journey, he was in a pretty bad place.